Species distribution modeling, or SDM, is a scientific approach that helps us understand where different species live and why. By combining information about where species are found with data about their environment, SDMs create models that predict where a species could potentially exist. These models are built on core ecological and biogeographical concepts, and they use both living biotic and non-living abiotic factors. SDMs have become increasingly important as geospatial data has become more accessible, allowing researchers to map and analyze species distributions across the globe. In this video, we'll explore how SDMs work, their applications, and why they matter for biodiversity and conservation. The heart of SDM lies the relationship between species and their environment. SDMs use quantitative models to link species location data, such as abundance or occurrence, with environmental variables that influence where species can thrive. Sometimes information about other species or vegetation types is included as well. With the right data, SDMs can be applied to any group of organisms, whether they live in the ocean, on land, or in freshwater. These models not only help us understand biodiversity patterns but also allow us to make spatial predictions, often visualized as maps, which are invaluable for research and conservation planning. Earliest SDMs were used to gain insight into ecological processes and to explain patterns in nature. For example, researchers used regression models to study tree competition in New Zealand forests, providing statistical evidence for how species interact in the wild. Another major use has been to detect changes in species' ecological niches, such as shifts due to invasion or speciation. These theory-driven applications remain central to SDM, helping scientists test hypotheses about how species respond to their environment and to each other. SDMs are powerful tools for conservation planning and environmental management. By predicting where species are likely to occur, SDMs help identify areas of high conservation value, guide habitat restoration efforts, and assess the risks of species invasions or disease spread. For instance, modeling the distribution of freshwater invertebrates in Australia provided critical information for evaluating the conservation value of river catchment. SDMs are also used to predict the impacts of climate change on species distributions, making them essential for future planning. One of the strengths of SDMs is their flexibility across different scales and levels of biological organization. They can be used to study broad patterns, such as species richness across continents, or more focused questions, like variation within a single species. Evolutionary biologists use SDMs to explore how species traits vary geographically, while ecologists use them to test hypotheses about community structure. This versatility makes SDMs a cornerstone of modern ecological research. Foundational concept in SDM is the ecological niche, the set of environmental conditions and resources that allow a species to persist. G. E. Hutchinson's view of the niche as a multidimensional space defined by environmental attributes is especially influential. The niche exists in niche space, while the biotope is its physical manifestation on the landscape. Importantly, the realized niche, a subset of the fundamental niche, reflects the influence of biotic interactions, dispersal limits, and disturbances. Understanding these concepts is key to interpreting SDM results. The relationship between niche space and biotope is not always straightforward. A single point in niche space can correspond to multiple locations in the biotope, or sometimes none at all. This duality means that models built in niche space may not fully capture the complexity of real-world distributions. Spatial autocorrelation, where environmental conditions are similar in nearby locations, can create patterns in species distributions, but other factors like disturbance history or social behavior also play roles. Recognizing these complexities helps avoid oversimplification in SDMs. Spatial autocorrelation, SAC, refers to the tendency for environmental variables to be similar in nearby locations. This pattern is common in nature and can influence species distributions. However, not all geographic clustering is due to SAC. Other factors like biotic interactions or disturbance can also cause clumping. Advanced statistical methods such as autoregressive models and generalized linear mixed models are used to account for SAC in SDMs, helping to separate environmental effects from purely geographic ones. According to niche theory, species respond to environmental gradients in characteristic ways. Often the relationship between abundance or fitness and an environmental variable is unimodal, meaning there's an optimal range with limits on either side. However, real-world response curves can be skewed, non-unimodal, or even complex, especially when multiple factors interact. Understanding the shape of these curves is crucial for interpreting SDM predictions and for making reliable projections to new environments. SDMs rely on two main conceptual models for representing geographical data: the field view and the entity view. The field view treats geography as a continuous surface where variables can be measured anywhere, while the entity view focuses on discrete features like species occurrences. In practice, SDMs often combine both perspectives, modeling species as entities and environmental predictors as fields. This dual approach allows for flexible and realistic modeling of species distributions. Selecting the right environmental predictors is a critical step in SDM. For terrestrial species, key factors include light, water, heat, and nutrients, organized in a spatial hierarchy from global to local scales. For animals, access to food, water, and cover is essential. Using only broad-scale predictors like climate can capture general patterns, but finer-scale variables such as terrain or land cover are needed for detailed habitat suitability model. The choice of predictors should be guided by ecological theory and the specific needs of the study. Imagine a scenario where researchers have unlimited resources to study a rare tree species. They carefully plan their sampling to cover all environmental gradients, collect high-quality GIS data, and use advanced statistical models to analyze the data. This idealized approach allows for robust model building, thorough evaluation, and reliable predictions. While real-world data are rarely perfect, this example highlights best practices in SDM, from data collection to model interpretation. Reality, most SDM practitioners must work with imperfect data, limited sample sizes, incomplete coverage, and various biases. It's important to recognize these limitations and to use adaptive approaches, such as collecting additional data or refining models as new information becomes available. The goal is to make the best use of available data while being transparent about uncertainties and potential shortcomings. This realistic approach ensures that SDM results are as reliable and informative as possible. SDMs can use different types of species data as the response variable: counts, cover abundance estimates, presence-absence records, or presence-only records. Each data type has its own modeling and validation methods. The choice depends on the research question and the available data. For example, presence-absent data provide clear information about surveyed areas, while presence-only data are often easier to obtain but come with more challenges in interpretation and modeling. Number of samples collected directly affects the complexity and reliability of SDMs. Larger sample sizes allow for more detailed modeling of species responses to environmental gradients, while small samples may only capture the strongest trends. Ensuring that samples cover the full range of environmental and geographic gradients is essential for unbiased and representative models. When working with rare species or limited data, special statistical approaches may be needed. SDMs assume that each sample is independent, meaning it brings new information to the model. However, datasets often include replicate records or dense clusters of samples, which can violate this assumption. Non-random sampling designs, such as grouping records within parks or along transects, require specialized modeling approaches like mixed models or autoregressive models. Cleaning and screening data for independence is an important step in SDM workflow. Presence-absence data provide information about both where a species is found and where it is not, making them valuable for modeling probability of occurrence. However, the meaning of absence can be ambiguous, especially if detection is imperfect or sampling areas vary in size. Presence-only data, on the other hand, are more common but come with challenges like survey bias and lack of information about unsurveyed areas. Each data type requires different modeling strategies and careful interpretation. Critical issue in SDM is imperfect detection, when a species is present but not observed during a survey. This leads to false absences and can bias model results. To address this, researchers use site occupancy models which separate the ecological process, true occupancy, from the observation process, detection probability. These models require repeat visits to sites and specialized statistical methods. Counting for imperfect detection improves the accuracy and reliability of SDMs. Detection probabilities can vary with season, especially for species that are only visible or active at certain times of year. Including seasonal effects as covariates in detection models helps account for this variability. For highly mobile species, defining what constitutes a site can be challenging, and researchers may focus on modeling use versus availability rather than strict occupancy. These considerations are important for interpreting SDM results and for designing effective surveys. Presence-only data, such as museum records or citizen science observations, are widely used in SDMs but come with unique challenges. These data often have errors in location or taxonomy and are subject to sampling biases, such as being collected only in accessible or well-known areas. Addressing these issues requires careful data cleaning, bias correction methods, and realistic assessment of data quality. Despite their limitations, presence-only data are invaluable for modeling species distributions, especially when other data are unavailable. Errors and biases in presence-only data can sometimes be corrected by updating taxonomies, improving location accuracy, or quantifying uncertainty. Bias correction methods include using information on survey effort, incorporating bias covariates, or leveraging presence-absence data to identify biases. The growing research effort in this area reflects the importance of presence-only data for SDM and the need for robust methods to handle their limitation. Otic interactions, such as competition, mutualism, or facilitation, can significantly influence species distributions. Including these interactions in SDMs is challenging, as they are often embedded in the species data and rarely have independent evidence. However, advances like joint SDMs allow researchers to model species co-occurrences and explore whether shared environmental responses or direct interactions drive pattern. Understanding biotic interactions is crucial for predicting future distributions, especially under changing environmental conditions. Disturbances, both recent like fires or land clearing and historic, such as glaciations, affect species distributions. Including disturbance variables in SDMs is often limited by the availability of map data, but remote sensing is making this more feasible. When disturbances are included as predictors, it becomes possible to separate their effects from other environmental factors, leading to more accurate models of potential species distribution. Environmental predictors in SDMs often come from GIS and remote sensing data. These include climate variables, terrain attributes, soil properties, and land cover types. The challenge is to select variables that are most closely related to species distributions, which may require transforming or summarizing raw data. For example, climate variables may be converted into biologically meaningful measures like growing degree days or seasonal water availability. Climate is a major driver of species distributions, especially at broad spatial scales. However, standard climate variables like monthly averages may not always capture the most relevant biological factors. Bioclimatic variables, such as those derived from WorldClim datasets, transform raw climate data into measures of seasonal variation, extremes, or water balance. Understanding and selecting the right climate variables is essential for building effective SDM. Rain features like elevation, slope, and aspect can influence local climate and soil moisture, affecting species distributions. While elevation is an indirect predictor, more proximal variables like temperature or moisture are preferred when available. Terrain-derived indices such as ruggedness or topographic wetness provide additional detail for modeling habitat suitability, especially at finer spatial scales. Soil properties such as depth, pH, fertility, and water holding capacity are important predictors but are often difficult to obtain at useful scales. Land cover or vegetation type is frequently used in SDMs, especially for wildlife habitat models. Remotely sensed data provide detailed maps of vegetation and land use, which can be transformed into meaningful predictors for specific species or ecological questions. Freshwater systems, SDMs use network-based GIS representations of rivers and streams, summarizing environmental variables at multiple spatial scales. In marine systems, depth serves as a proxy for factors like temperature, salinity, and light. Other important marine predictors include productivity, tides, and dissolved oxygen. As more global and regional datasets become available, SDMs for aquatic and marine species are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Linearity, when predictors are highly correlated, is a common issue in SDMs. While it may not be problematic for interpolation within the sampled range, it can cause problems when projecting to new times or places. Best practices include selecting a subset of predictors based on ecological knowledge, literature, or exploratory analysis, and testing alternative choices to assess their impact on model output. SDMs are typically framed as supervised learning problems, where species occurrence or abundance is predicted from environmental variables. Approaches range from parametric, model-driven methods like generalized linear models, GLMs, to non-parametric, data-driven methods like machine learning algorithms. The choice of method depends on the data, the research question, and the desired balance between interpretability and predictive power. Generalized linear models, GLMs, are a flexible statistical framework for SDM, accommodating different types of response variables and error distributions. Generalized additive models, GAMs, extend GLMs by allowing nonlinear relationships through smoothing functions. Both approaches require decisions about model complexity, variable selection, and evaluation criteria. Information criteria like AIC are commonly used for model selection. Machine learning methods, such as decision trees, random forests, and boosted regression trees, are increasingly used in SDMs. These methods can handle complex nonlinear relationships and interactions among predictors. While they offer strong predictive performance, they may be less interpretable and more prone to overfitting. Recent advances have adapted these methods to address issues like imperfect detection and spatial variation in species-environment relationship. Presence-only data can be modeled using specialized methods like envelope models, multivariate distance measures, and maximum entropy max-ent approaches. These methods compare the environments where species are observed to the broader landscape, often using background or pseudo-absence samples. Each method has strengths and limitations, and the choice depends on data quality and research objectives. Bayesian statistical methods are increasingly used in SDMs, especially for complex modeling problems. The Bayesian framework allows for flexible model specification, incorporation of prior knowledge, and updating of models as new data become available. These methods are particularly useful for challenging cases, such as small sample sizes or hierarchical data structures. Evaluating SDM performance requires appropriate metrics, depending on the type of response variable. For continuous variables, measures like root mean square error are used. For binary predictions, metrics like the area under the ROC curve AUC and kappa coefficient are common. Setting up training and testing datasets and involving expert judgment are important for meaningful model evaluation. Beyond individual species, SDMs can be applied to broader biodiversity attributes such as species richness, community composition, or functional group distribution. Approaches include modeling richness directly from environmental predictors or stacking individual SDMs to estimate richness per grid cell. These models are valuable for biodiversity assessment and conservation planning at multiple scales. SDMs can be extended to model community or ecosystem types as categorical variables, or to estimate species turnover among sites using matrix regression or multivariate distance approaches. These methods provide insights into patterns of biodiversity and help guide conservation efforts by identifying areas of high community diversity or unique ecosystem types. Major application of SDMs is projecting species distributions to new times or places, such as under future client scenarios or in the context of biological invasions. However, SDMs are based on correlations within the training region and may not capture causal relationships, making projections inherently uncertain. Researchers are developing new methods to improve projections, including incorporating biotic interactions, migration ability, and fine-scale predictors. SDMs are widely used to predict the impacts of climate change on species distributions. Models fitted to current environments are projected onto future climate scenarios, often downscaled from global circulation models. Recent advances include accounting for microclimates, migration barriers, and uncertainty across models and scenarios. Despite these improvements, the inherent limitations of correlation-based models remain, highlighting the need for careful interpretation and integration with other approaches. SDMs are also used to reconstruct past species distributions, paleodistributions, using paleoclimate data, and to predict the potential spread of invasive species. While paleodistributions can be evaluated with fossil or genetic data, predicting invasions is more challenging due to incomplete knowledge of fundamental niches and the influence of biotic interactions. Advances in modeling tools and integration with expert knowledge are helping to address these challenges. Improve forecasting and impact assessment. SDMs are increasingly combined with other data and modeling approaches, such as spatially explicit models of population and community dynamics. This integration allows for more realistic predictions of species responses to environmental change, especially at larger spatial scales. Combining different methods leverages the strengths of each and helps overcome the limitations of correlation-based SDM. Specific application of SDM, as well as the characteristics of the data, determine which factors are most important in modeling. These include species detection probability, environmental limiting factors, spatial autocorrelation, sample size, sample bias, scale, disturbance, biotic interactions, and demographic processes. Understanding these factors and how they interact is essential for building robust and informative SDM. Assessing errors and uncertainties is a critical part of SDM. This involves understanding the limitations of the data, the assumptions of different model types, and the sources of uncertainty in predictions. Transparent reporting and visualization of uncertainties help policymakers and stakeholders make informed decisions based on SDM outputs. SDM is a rapidly evolving field, with advances in data availability, statistical methods, and computational power driving new applications and insights. As the number of published SDM studies grows, emphasis is shifting from technical modeling issues to practical applications in environmental assessment, forecasting, and macroecology. Continued integration with other approaches and ongoing methodological innovation will ensure that SDMs remain a vital tool for biodiversity science. In summary, species distribution modeling is a powerful approach for understanding and predicting where species live and how they respond to environmental change. While SDMs have limitations, especially when projecting to new conditions, they provide essential insights for biodiversity assessment, conservation planning, and ecological research. By combining robust data, sound ecological theory, and advanced modeling techniques, SDMs help us make informed decisions to protect our planet's biodiversity.